All right, Matthew chapter 6. Matthew 6, verses 1 through 4. This is lesson, I believe it's 27. I didn't look at the number. Yeah, lesson 27. It says, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them, otherwise you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed," it says, "do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may receive the glory of men. Surely I say to you, they have their reward. And when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your Father who sees in secret shall reward you openly." Now, I want to think about this verse in a primary context that I think is often missed, and one of the reasons I think it is missed is because I think that the rendering in verse 1 is poor with regard to the King James and the New King James, and that is that it says charitable deed there in verse 1, or charity. I believe the word is there in verse number 1. Is that right? King James word, is that the word charity in verse 1?
Alms.
It says alms?
Yep. All
right. The better rendering there, based on the textual evidence, is the word righteousness. Has righteousness in brackets after alms. Righteousness is the better rendering. It's the better rendering textually and contextually, and I'll explain how that will go in just a few moments. Hopefully you spent some time reading the lesson in preparation for class this morning, but I'll tell you this, and when I say the lesson, I mean the physical lesson that's in your book. I am not a fan of the word giving in this context. And the lesson as it is written uses the word giving repeatedly throughout, from beginning to end. And the reason I don't like the word giving in application of this lesson is because when we hear the word giving, what do we think of? We think about this, right? And Matthew 6, 1-4 ain't got nothing to do with this. And so, again, there's nothing technically wrong with using the word giving in writing the lesson, but I think it leads to confusion. I think we'd be far better served if the word benevolence was used in the lesson, because that's what's under consideration in this verse, not this right here. And because we have considered this text in regard to this, we've come to some unreasonable and illogical conclusions about our giving that I've heard throughout the course of 30 years in full-time ministry, and I'll get to that as we get down into verses number 3 and 4. But the word righteousness is a better rendering in verse 1. And what we find then is, let not your righteousness, take heed that you do not do your righteousness before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. And then verse 2 begins with therefore. In other words, there's going to be an explanation of Jesus' statement about letting our righteousness be done before men. And the first thing after that, therefore, is what? Charitable deeds. And by the way, are alms. Guess what? The word in verse 2 is alms. It's literally the word for benevolence in the Greek language. And so the word benevolence belongs in verse 2. But then look down to verse number 5. What's the first word in verse number 5? And. All right, so this and means it's included in the therefore. The and in verse 5 is in the context of the therefore in verse 2, And then look at verse 16. What's the first word in verse 16? Moreover. Which means what? I'm continuing this same line of thought. So now what we find is that Jesus makes a statement in Matthew 6 and verse 1 about doing our righteousness before men to be seen by them. And then he articulates it specifically in 3 areas. Do not do your righteousness before men, particularly your benevolence, your prayer, and your fasting. See? Now, why would it be important for us? Why would it be important for us to understand this? Well, look with me down at verse 2. And who is Jesus condemning in verse 2? According to the text. Don't interpret it for me. Just tell me who it is. Hypocrites. Hypocrites. Now, in verse 5, who is he talking about specifically? Hypocrites. And in verse 16, who is he talking about specifically? Hypocrites. Now, we have to figure out, who are these hypocrites? Now, by the way, I think we know who they are based on going all the way back to chapter 5 and verse number 20. Go back to chapter 5 and verse number 20. For I say to you that unless your what? Righteousness. And that's what we're talking about in chapter 6 verse 1, right? Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And so now we can identify who are the hypocrites. The scribes and the Pharisees. In verse 2, verse 5, and verse 16, Jesus is talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. So now this gives us a better understanding of what Jesus is saying and why he is saying it. What is he saying? What is he really talking about here verses number 1 through 4? What is he really talking about? Is he talking about benevolence? Is that what he's talking about? What's he really talking about?
Not what you do.
That's right, he's talking about motive, isn't he? He's not talking about benevolence, he's talking about motive. And by the way, what's he talking about in verse 5? Is he really talking about prayer? What's he talking about? More motive, right? And when he gets to verse 16, is he really talking about fasting? Or is he talking about motive? You see? Because there's nothing in the world wrong with being benevolent. In fact, we should be benevolent. And there's nothing in the world wrong with prayer, because we're to be prayerful. And there's nothing in the world wrong with fasting, and if we're able to, we can fast. Now, benevolence and prayer are the only 2 things in this list that are specifically enjoined on Christians. By the way, I got that question this week as a result of all my talk about Israel. Somebody followed up with a question. I got another question. It says, what about fasting? And I said, fasting was a part of Jewish life, but it's not enjoined as a command or an obligation to Christians. And as I got to thinking, I think that fasting was really not so much an obligatory action of the Jews as it was an inward compulsion, rather than an outward compulsion, an inward compulsion. You know, for example, in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now there was a couple of specific cases where fasting was enjoined on the Jews. If you read, when you read in your Old Testament, you shall afflict your souls, it's generally talking about you don't eat. But even then, that's like a one day situation. You shall afflict like on the Day of Atonement, you shall afflict your souls. In other words, you don't eat that day. Because this is the day that is where all of your sins are remembered. All right? And so there were a couple of specific compelled fasts among the Jews. But if you remember in Luke 18, the Pharisee said, I fast twice in the week. Now that wasn't something that was enjoined on him. That was something that he enjoined on himself. Of course, we know from this text why he did it. he did it out of a bad motive. But my point is this. The things that are mentioned here in verses 2, 5, and 16 were the epitome of Jewish righteousness. In other words, the Jews measured, and I don't think there is something wrong with it, but there's a sense in which you have to have some measure of righteousness. In other words, there have to be deeds done, right? Deeds have to be done in order for righteousness to manifest itself. But in the eyes of the Jews, benevolence, prayer, and fasting were the three biggies. They were the three biggies. And so Jesus is talking about the three big ones. He says your motive for these three things is to be pure and not like that of the hypocrites, that is, the scribes and the Pharisees.
Well, somebody saw you do good work or goodwill. That was a good thing. They did it to be seen.
There you go.
See, that's the problem.
There's the problem. The problem is not being seen.
Yeah.
The problem is doing it to be seen.
People have asked me before the fasting question, and I told them, you can fast all you want, hide when you do it.
Yeah,
and they're like, what is that? I said, I don't need to be a part of that.
Right.
It's nothing to me. It's between you and God. You're remorseful about something, you feel that you need to do this, go do it.
Yeah. By the way, fasting. Yeah, it's like right. It doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. That's why Jesus said in Matthew 6:16-18, says when you fast, don't be like the hypocrites who walk around with a sad countenance, with their face all scrunched up all the time, so that people will ask them what's wrong, so that they can tell them that they're fasting. They walk around with a sad countenance. And the whole point of the sad countenance was for somebody to inquire why they had a sad countenance. So they could tell them, oh, I'm fasting today. I'm fasting today. By the way, my dad's mom was like that. She was always hunting somebody to ask her how she was doing. Now, this true story now, because this happened all the time. You can be at my grandmother's house. And everything going hunky-dory. Grandkids are there, family's there, everybody's laughing, cutting up, having a good time. Everybody's laughing, everybody's happy. Phone rings. She walk over to that telephone, pick it up, she say, hello. I mean, like she's drawing her last breath. Now here's what my grandmother's doctor said about her. Quote, she enjoyed poor health all of her life. That's what Dr. Como said, but said she enjoyed poor health all of her life. Now, she was always hunting somebody to inquire. And by the way, my grandmother didn't understand how you doing is a greeting. It's not an inquiry. It's not an invitation for you to spend the next 15 minutes talking about your sciatica. All right. So, but that's the situation. That's the situation here with the Pharisees and the fasting. By the way, fasting is a spiritual discipline, and it can be quite helpful. But obviously, there are some people who health-wise, like for example, Freeman wouldn't be able to fast. Why? He's diabetic. He's diabetic. Diabetics got to have, they got to have a little food along the way. All day long, take a little. Well, Philip, Philip's diabetic. He keeps a bag of nabs close to him at all times at work. A lot of times when we're running, Philip have to stop and take what we call like a goo gel or some type of supplement with electrolytes and carbs in it, because he'll start crashing. And that's another reason why. Marathons are more difficult for Philip than other people. He's good for the first 21, 22 miles. But when his sugar starts crashing at mile 22, he has some problems. It just affects him. And so that's why I think that's why the Lord in His wisdom didn't enjoin fasting on us, because it would be physically detrimental to the health of some people. But if you can fast, I think you should, because it helps us to, as Paul said, I buffet my body and bring it under subjection. In other words, we should not always give in to every desire of our flesh. And when I say flesh, I don't mean what's carnal in a bad way, but we shouldn't give in to every single desire of our flesh. And fasting can be a very good way to do that. Fasting is a very good way to intensify one's focus. For example, if you have a prayer situation, you might skip lunch and spend some time in prayer and meditation, praying about a very serious situation. That would be fasting. Sometimes we might fast because we need to spend more time in the Word of God, and we don't need to stop. We need to focus. And so, fasting is something that we can do, but it's not enjoined on us. But when we do, so keep it to yourself. If you do, keep it to yourself. By the way, I'll just mention this. I have a friend in Texas who has a pretty serious health disorder that causes him a lot of physical pain. And the only way for him to control his pain for lengthy periods of time is he goes out, he's got a cabin out in the country, and he goes out and he stays there for 5 or 6 days and he don't eat. He doesn't eat for nearly a full week. And for some reason that fixes him temporarily for several weeks and helps control the pain. When the pain gets bad, he goes and fasts for 4, 5, or 6 days. And so it even shows us that there are some health benefits that can be achieved through designed fasting. All right, so now let's go down to get out of the introduction into the next heading. And I scratched out giving, and I wrote benevolence. Benevolence with a righteous heart. And John's already spoken. John has already spoken to that first paragraph. It's not done to be seen, but it doesn't. I should add this. It doesn't negate it if it is seen. Some people think if anybody sees what I do, then I don't get any credit for it. And I understand, and I appreciate that sentiment. That we want to be as quiet about our benevolence as we can. But just because somebody sees us doesn't negate it. I'll give you an example. Our ladies. How many people were witness to our ladies carrying food? To Miss Jean. Nurses and caregivers and family members. Did they see that? Did people see our ladies taking food over there? Did they know they took food over there? Well, sure they did. Does that mean that our ladies don't get any spiritual credit, so to speak, for their good deeds? Well, no. But we don't do it to be seen. We do it because it's the right thing to do. But just because people see it doesn't negate the deed or the spiritual credit or the spiritual reward of God seeing us and rewarding us for that deed. Now, I look down at, he talks about in the second paragraph about the sounding of a trumpet. Now, I don't know, and he says here, it says it's unclear as to whether or not this example is an actual example or it's just hyperbole. Okay? I tend to think it's hyperbole, and here's why. When you get to chapter 7, Jesus speaks in hyperbole with regard to, judge not that you be not judged. With what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And then he talks about you're trying to pick a splinter out of your brother's eye, and there's a 4x4 beam sticking out of your own eye. In other words, Jesus was prone to speak in hyperbole. It's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. That's hyperbole. People made all types of explanations about some gate in the walls of Jerusalem where camels had to get on their knees and crawl through. Why can't Jesus just speak in hyperbole? Because he obviously spoke in hyperbole in other places. It's better for him that a millstone was hung around his neck and cast into the sea. I mean, that's hyperbole. And so, why can't this be hyperbole? Because Jesus used hyperbole in Matthew 7 to condemn the scribes and the Pharisees. So why wouldn't he use hyperbole in this case to condemn the scribes and the Pharisees? I really don't think they literally sounded a trumpet before they did their good deeds. And so I tend toward the hyperbole as opposed to the literal. But then, thirdly, or in the third paragraph, it says Matthew 6:3-4 says to give alms quietly. And that, of course, that goes to the whole context of what we're talking about. Is that that we can do good, we can do good without announcing it. Hold on, let me give one illustration. I'll get you, John. The one the meme that kills me is the guy handing the bum $10 on the street, and he's taking a selfie. And that's the picture. That's the picture here of Matthew 6:1-4. Is I'm doing good, but I want to make sure everybody sees that I'm doing good. All right, John.
I take that when I read that. I take that as Jesus is telling he's condemning the fanfare, basically.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what I draw from that. He's condemning the fanfare. Don't do it, like I said, to be seen. It's all right if you're seen.
Yeah.
But they did it. Pharisees did it for fanfare. Is what I'm saying.
Right. And I'm really not. I don't want to evil surmise. Okay, from the outset, I don't want to be overly critical or be unduly critical. But it always bothered me on Memorial Day weekend when you had the big Jerry's Kids, telethon. When all the movie stars would come out with their great big checks to give Jerry.
They could have been doing it all year long.
Yeah, well, and they didn't have to walk out. Mr. T didn't have to walk out there with a giant $25,000 check. That he got from The Price is Right. It just those things just always just kind of bothered me. Don't get me wrong. I was thankful that they did it. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, dude, you make $10 million a year, or you make what you're giving to the rest of us peons is a lot of money, but to you, it's front pocket money. And I'm not just talking about Mr. T, all right? I'm just talking about the people, the wealthy and that's not to say that they don't do good deeds in other areas, that they don't. That, for example, they may help the American Cancer Society or the heart, the lung, so but it just always just rubbed me the wrong way for people to march out there and do that. And I always thought about this. I always thought about this verse. But I also thought about this. I'd rather them do it that way as not do it at all. However they want to do it, I'd rather them do it. I'd rather those kids get some help. I'd rather those foundations get help in a way that rubs me wrong, as for them to not get it at all. All right. So down to the last paragraph, it says, so what does this imply about our giving or benevolence? That there is more to it than it being done in secret, even though that is the main point. It shows that it's also something to be done often. Now, I don't understand the next line. It shows it is something to be done quickly. I think what he means by quickly is immediately. In other words, it's to be done when the need is discovered. I think that's what he's talking about. It's something done, it says, with little discussion or thinking. In other words, I don't have to ponder if I'm going to help this person. There's a need. I have the ability to meet the need, or in some way assist with the need, and I don't have to give it even a second's thought. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. There's a proverb in Proverbs 3 and verse number 27 that says, "Do not withhold good from him to whom it is due, when it is in your hand to give it." Now that's not a direct statement about benevolence, but I think the principle is still there. Because God tells us to be benevolent. And so there is a sense in which our benevolence is given to those that when it is due. Yeah. When you know to do good, do it. And when you have the ability to do good. James talked to this very point. This is the whole faith without works is dead argument. You have a brother or sister destitute of, they're naked or destitute of their daily food, and you say, "Be warmed and filled," but you don't give them what they need. So what good is that? And that's the introduction to the entire faith. Faith without works is dead discussion there in James chapter 2, beginning in verse 14. All right, let's go over to the next page, and this kind of summarizes some of the mistakes that have been made in regard to do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And what I mean by that is that some Christians think it's nobody's business what I give on the Lord's day. It's nobody's business what I give on the Lord's day. Well, let me ask you a question. Is it a sin to be covetous? Is covetousness a sin? It is. By the way, Paul goes so far as to refer to it as idolatry in Colossians 3, verse 5. Does the Bible tell us in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse number 9 through 11 that we're to withdraw from covetous people? It does. So how then would we know a person is covetous? If nobody has the right to know what Christians give, how would we ever know if someone was covetous? In other words, there's a logical difficulty there, right? Ma'am. That's true, but for the most part, we have a general idea about. I mean, I won't say who, but I used to know a guy that probably made six figures, and I watched him put $20 in the plate when he managed to show up on Sunday.
You can tell by the lifestyle that they lead.
Yeah, I mean, guys living in.
A year, come on.
Yeah. When you're living in a $300,000 house and you're driving $100,000 worth of vehicles and take 4 vacations a year, and you drop $20 and what?
I'm not talking about that.
Well, but that's a clear indication of covetousness. That's what I'm saying.
But I mean, that is obvious. Obviously, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about any one of us. I mean, none of us drive $300,000 cars. And I'm not saying you don't have the right to know what I put in because I don't care. But I'm just saying, how do you judge if someone's covetous?
Well, I mean, it would be like any other aspect of shepherding. You shepherd the sheep. You can talk to people. I mean, that's all you have to do. It's not like being accusatory. It's just about talking to people.
I was just curious. I mean, I don't even know how I would know to be alerted to the fact that someone was being covetous. Unless it was obvious.
Explain.
What does it mean to be covetous?
Yes.
Okay. It means to want or to keep for yourself what rightfully belongs to another. Is that a pretty fair definition?
In this case, God.
In this case, God. In this case, God. Yeah. It's to want or to keep for yourself what belongs to another, and in this case, it would apply to our giving. Now,
But I don't understand. I don't care what Bob puts in. I don't care what she does.
No. I didn't say it was everybody's business. I said it was the elders' business.
I still don't think it's her business either.
Covetous has nothing to do
Because
with you.
I make some money, like last Sunday, I wasn't here, of course, everybody missed me, right?
Oh, yeah.
You weren't here?
I was working. I have two jobs. I've got a job during the day and a shop at night.
I understand.
Every day. When I get out of here, I gotta go home and work. Next month, probably slammed again. But during the summer, I don't make as much money as I do in the winter. Do I think it's John's business for him to know what I give? No. I don't care what he makes. I don't care what you make. I don't even know how much you make a week or a month.
All right, Jimmy.
I don't care.
Jimmy, let's go back to my first 2 questions. Is it a sin to be covetous?
Yes. But I
It is sin to be covetous.
Can you? Is the church to withdraw from the covetous?
I guess if I'm covetous, I guess y'all better be withdrawing me.
What? Hey, here's the solution. Here's the solution, Jimmy. Don't be covetous.
Yeah, but you're jumping to the worst.
You're jumping to the worst. That's right.
Look, wait a minute. Hold up, Bob. I want to hear what you say. I mean, I made $150 last year by me driving that piece of crap truck.
Jimmy.
It don't look like it though, does it?
Jimmy.
No.
Jimmy, calm down.
Listen. From Todd's point, as from the elders aspect, we want to talk to people and know that you're doing good. When we know that you're doing good, but we see that you're not giving back to the Lord, then we're worried about that's on you, man. What you give to the Lord is on you. We're looking out for your soul. We want to make sure that you're not covetous. You understand what I'm saying?
Jimmy, can you be lost for being covetous?
Yes.
No, you can't. You can. I mean, the Bible says.
First time I've ever known what that meant.
See, and look, that's fine. That's fine. But what I'm saying is, and John hit the nail on the head. It's about shepherds shepherding sheep. You know, shepherds want all their sheep to go to heaven, right? And it doesn't matter what sin a sheep might be caught up, a particular sheep might be caught up in. The shepherds have a responsibility to help that sheep overcome whatever sin that they might have in their life, including the sin of covetousness. Now,
And you missed a major point. It isn't anybody else's business.
That's what I was saying, Jimmy. I didn't say what you give is Mason's business.
No.
I said it was the elder's business.
Also, you have to use that information in doing your programs for the year.
Well, that's part of it, but the thing is, we want everybody to go to heaven. And if a person's caught up in a sin, including the sin of covetousness, then as elders we have responsibility for your soul. Now look, I'm not even remotely implying that you're covetous, because obviously we're just now defining terms. Now my point is this: in Acts 4, in Acts 2, and in Acts 4, and in Acts 5, the Bible is clear that the early Christians brought their contribution and laid it at the apostles' feet. They didn't put it in an envelope. They didn't put it in some secret box somewhere. People came and they brought that money and laid it at the apostles' feet. And in the very next chapter, in Acts chapter 5, we find Ananias and Sapphira, who brought money and laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was theirs to do with as they pleased. And I'm not even saying that it wasn't a generous contribution. Their problem was they wanted people to think more highly of them than their contribution warranted. They lied about their giving. Yeah, it wasn't the fact that they didn't give enough, because Peter said, when it was yours to do with as you pleased. When you sold it, the money was yours to do with as you pleased. If you'd have just came and said, look, we sold this piece of property and we got $10,000 for it, and here's $5,000 to relieve the needs of the church. You know what? That's a praiseworthy thing. But if you sell a piece of land for $10,000 and you come up to the apostles and you say, we sold a piece of land and we got $5,000 for it, and here it is. And lied. That's why they got struck down.
I know this is maybe not the same thing.
But I'm just saying, what I'm saying is, people's giving in the first century was public.
Say John, okay? He's the elder.
All right?
All right. He makes, say this week everybody comes and pays him for his job, okay?
All right.
He's got a pocket full of money, folded money.
Mm-hmm.
He puts it in a plate, right?
Okay.
Next week, same thing. He's like, man, I don't know where he's going to come with this money. I get paid this week. Right? We put this money in there. Well, then you got 2 or 3 other elders over there. Man, John, boy, well, the next month, he got paid. So then them elders said, John, why ain't you paying me, man? He's like, oh,
John don't pay the elders.
But whoever counts the money knows.
John counts the money.
$500 a week.
Lynn counts the checks.
John counts the money and Lynn counts the checks.
And then somebody else says, hey, what's going on with John? He's been putting in as much money as he has been. So then they're going to go over and ask him, John, why ain't you been paying the piper, Bubba? Well, he ain't made no money this week, and he's got to keep on. No, I don't think it's nobody's business. Put the man what's in there.
It's not yours. It's not your business. What did I say, Jimmy? Whose business, Jimmy? Whose business did I say that it is? Thank you.
So then what are they going to do? Come and say, hey, John, why don't you pay me?
I need y'all to keep in mind. That it's not looking for a person sinning. It's looking out for danger that person doesn't fall into it.
Right.
That's what.
All right, Bobby. Bobby, you get to let. Yeah, we got to give Bob his turn. We made him wait.
I understand. Elders look out for myself. I agree with that. But covenants has nothing to do with giving. Nothing.
I wouldn't say that.
It does not.
I would say it can. You can't make that statement, because covetousness does involve giving.
Covetous means I want something of yours, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I look at it too.
Yeah, but if you're keeping back something that's God's and it's money, then covetous has something to do with giving.
Yeah, that's right.
But you just said covetous don't have nothing to do with giving. It can just manifest itself.
No,